Bertram Chester Raynes was born on March 12, 1924, in Jersey City, New Jersey. He was the son of immigrants. His father, Morris Raynes, was born in Poland, and his mother, Celia Mokashi, was born in Russia. His brother was born in New York City 6 years earlier. Jersey City is just across the Hudson from Lower Manhattan and includes the Statue of Liberty. In his earliest years, Bert lived near the Orange Dot, but spent most of his childhood years near the Red Dot. When asked about his childhood, all Bert would say is, "I grew up on the mean streets of Jersey," in reference to the famous 1973 movie directed by Martin Scorsese that took place in Lower Manhattan. Bert grew up in the heart of a major city in an apartment in this building, a long way from nature. Bert graduated from high school in January 1941, just 10 months before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. He had three very good friends who wrote prolifically in his yearbook. One exclaimed, "I guess this is just as good a time as any to tell you what a swell pal you've been, and that I've enjoyed every minute of our friendship. Sincerely, I'm going to miss you, even though you have lousy taste when it comes to girls." Bert was very smart. He worked very hard. He read profusely. He excelled in school. He decided early in high school that he wanted to be a chemical engineer. He was accepted in a major chemical engineering program at Penn State College, paid for by joining ROTC, the Army Reserve Officers Training Corps. There was a critical national need for chemical engineers during World War II, so Bert never had to show up for active duty in the Army. One big lesson at Penn State, Bert explains, was from my professor Black Mike Cannon, shown with a red circle, who changed my life. He told everyone who would listen at the time that natural resources are finite. They will not last forever. We should conserve and use the resources wisely. It had a big impact on me. But the biggest event during the fall of freshman year was when Bert noticed this tall woman, 6'1.5". He had to meet her. So he explains, I met her, and she snagged me. We didn't get along at first, and then we started to talk, and then we never finished talking. Meg grew up in a small town knowing farm life and open spaces. I grew up in a highly urbanized setting, innocent of Mother Nature. A perfect match. Meg and Bert were married on August 17, 1944, after graduating from college. For decades, Bert brought home fresh flowers for Meg every Friday night, until they moved to Jackson in 1972, where fresh flowers were not available in the winter. For 66 years, Bert and Meg had a very intense and loving relationship. He credits her as his muse. He received many awards later in life, but he states quite clearly that the awards he appreciates most were given to Bert and Meg together. After college, Bert became a research assistant at General Electric Research Laboratories in Schenectady, New York, the first industrial research facility in the United States, established in 1900. This job was an honor, only offered to young scientists who truly stood out in their field. In Bert's words, I was the baby of the laboratory. I got to meet some really wonderful people who you might not otherwise meet, really top figures in science. This job allowed Bert to earn a master's degree at nearby Union College, which he completed with honors in 1949. While working in Schenectady, Bert sang in a barbershop quartet and in a men's chorus. Who would have thunk? Meg and Bert had a cabin in the woods in the Adirondacks north of Schenectady. One morning, while Bert was being very careful not to scare a deer, something fell out of the sky into the river, close enough to get him wet, and emerged with a large bass. This got Bert's attention. He headed off to the library to discover this thing was an osprey. and began to read all the best bird guides of the time. Meg and Bert also camped out with friends who, while lying in their sleeping bags inside their tents, could identify 20 birds just by the sounds. This really impressed Bert. He had an insatiable curiosity, and he had considerable experience doing research. So he set off on a life of learning about birds. Bert especially enjoyed opening others' eyes to nature, as his eyes had been opened by Meg and many others. Bert valued friendships highly. He listened to and learned from friends every day of his life. Bert was injured in a horse accident that left him unable to have children. Back in those days, you could not adopt a child unless you already had a child. So Meg and Bert poured their boundless love into their Cocker Spaniels throughout their lives. Bert took more pictures of Cocker Spaniels than all things in nature. He preferred to observe and experience wildlife carefully rather than be distracted by the mechanics of photography. In 1950, Meg and Bert moved to Cleveland, Ohio, where he worked as head of process development at Horizons Incorporated. Bert then became vice president of Rand Development Corporation, in charge of environmental issues from 1960 to 1971. James Rand III, whose father developed Remington Rand and Sperry Rand, was a notable inventor and entrepreneur, developing primarily medical devices. But Rand had broad interests and was well connected in Cleveland and in Washington, D.C. As Bert tells it, I was offered an opportunity to work on pollution control research if I could just get the finances for it. Bert developed and prototyped techniques for using processed sewage to fertilize plants to revitalize severely polluted areas. His work was well known in Washington. This is one of the pens used by President Lyndon B. Johnson on November 3, 1966, in signing the Demonstration Cities and Metropolitan Development Act of 1966. Bert developed and prototyped techniques for using crushed coal as a filter for sewage treatment. Here he is explaining the process to Stuart Udall, then Secretary of Interior. Bert became president of the Cleveland Audubon Society. As an adolescent and in high school, Bert read widely about the West. He especially enjoyed learning about Olaus and Marty Murie, about Frank and John Craighead, and about Jackson Hole. Meg's father had visited Jackson in 1927 and had told her many stories related to Jackson. So the first chance Meg and Bert got to take an actual vacation, they drove to Jackson Hole in 1950. As Bert tells it, we came in June during the wrong month. We never really saw the whole mountain range. It rained every day, and the mosquitoes were interesting. But the people were nice. We came back to Jackson every year, except one, in September, until we were able to move to Jackson permanently in 1972. So they bought a lot in 1969 and had a house they designed built on a handshake in 1972. Note all the bushes and trees. What you cannot see are the mosquitoes that were so bad in the spring that you had to wear a head net to do gardening. Bert brought us together in so many ways. Bert, together with Reverend Dan Abrams, founded the Jackson Hole Bird Club in 1976. When Meg became less mobile, she discovered that she could see more birds just sitting on a bench, waiting for the others to return. In this way, they introduced us to the fine art of bird sitting. Bert wrote more than 2,000 newspaper columns over 40 years, an amazing achievement. He developed a distinctive writing style that was informative and fun to read. Bert wrote many books. The copy of Valley So Sweet that he gave to Meg was inscribed, "Honey, this book is yours. It was your basic inspiration. Of course, most things stem from you. Thanks." love me. In Meg's copy of Curmudgeon Chronicles, he wrote, "To my muse, thank you so much for all you do. I love you, Bert." The word curmudgeon was assigned by Becky Woods, the publisher. It sold books. We all know that Bert is the exact opposite of a curmudgeon. But with his marvelous sense of humor, Bert took great pride in the title. In 1995, friends dedicated the Muse stand to Meg, an exclosure on the Elk Refuge designed to protect some cottonwood trees favored by eagles from the hordes of elk. In 1997, these same friends dedicated the Bert Raynes Wildlife Observation Deck and Bert's Bench. On September 11, 2007, Meg died of cancer, but was ever present in Bert's mind for the rest of his life. Friends gathered at the National Museum of Wildlife Art and at Meg's Muse stand on September 23rd. In July 2008, Bert accidentally stepped on the accelerator instead of the brake while parking at Palazzo Liquor store. While recovering in the hospital, he got to talking to Greg McCurran about art. They decided to write a book together, Birds of Sage and Scree. Bert wrote most of the words while convalescing, and Greg painted most of the pictures while convalescing. Meg and Bert brought us together in so many ways. In the 1980s, Meg and a few women decided to have lunch together on Wednesdays. So Bert, Gus Schwartz, and Frank Craighead decided the men should do the same. So began the Deaf as a Post Lunch Bunch, still active today. There were game nights, there were training sessions, there were potlucks, there were celebrations. There were their golden 50-year wedding anniversary, birthday parties, holiday celebrations. As Jan Hayes puts it, Meg and Bert were a good excuse for having a party. They inspired friends to make things happen. As Bert put it, we've been very lucky to have wonderful friends and a lot of them. Well, Bert, your friends feel very lucky, very fortunate, very privileged, and very inspired to be a friend of that SOB, sweet old Bert.